This should be fine. November 20th, 1991. Time, 8:43 p.m. Recording for medical students from the University of Missouri. This autopsy is conducted by Jack Hanman. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the autopsy room. Today, you will have the dubious pleasure of following a full autopsy, step by step. For those of you who have already performed your first autopsy, this will refresh your basic knowledge. In turn, for those whose knowledge is only theoretical, I advise not to watch. Let's start. Always wear an apron, goggles, and it's... Now, onto the police folder. That will contain all sorts of pertinent information as to who the deceased might be and what potentially happened to them. So, let's take a closer look, shall we? The deceased's name is Tobias Chambers. The deceased was found on the outskirts of a parking lot at a gas. The body was noticed by a station employee during the morning. He worked most of his life at the local port dealing with signs of libation. That's it. It's worth remembering the context around the scene of a death. This allows you to better interpret any traces found on the body. I shouldn't start the procedure without gloves. Now it's our turn to take some pictures for our files. If I can just remember where I left the camera. Aha! There you are. I knew it was here somewhere. As I mentioned at the beginning, before we begin the internal examination, we need to document the cadaver and the condition it arrived in. We begin with a full body photo. Try and stick to the top-down rule. Voila! Now we move on to the next step. Take your time. Look at the corpse from you're looking for. Boiler-healed wound. Looks old. I'll take a closer look later. That's something interesting. It will be necessary to check whether this injury was severe enough to cause damage to the brain. Hardened hands, worn out by physical work, and frostbite. Some wounds in the feet and signs of frostbite, probably because the subject's shoes were too small. In a moment, we will check which of our initial observations will be worthy of further consideration. But before we get to that, I need to write down some basic data. Personal information. The deceased was unclothed. Date. Okay. As you can see, I note everything down on previously prepared forms. Every pathologist must keep a detailed record of every step of the autopsy. This not only allows you to track the procedure. So, enough of the boring part. Let's begin, but for this, you're going to need a magnifying glass. Which spot first? It looks like a burn mark. No doubt painful, but it's not pertinent for this case. Definitely a painful mix of frostbite, abrasions, and blisters. Toby had been wearing shoes too small for him for a very long time. Here we can see frostbite on the fingertips. We can tell by the characteristic skin color. I can confirm the presence of ecchymosis on the deceased man's head. Add alcohol. So far, there are a lot of superficial wounds, but only one serious injury to the head. Let's go back to our notes. First, I mark the location of the injuries and make notes for each one. The head wound. Definitely an important clue. If Toby's body was cold for a prolonged... We're not in frost season yet. Even though this type of wound didn't contribute to the deceased's death, we're still required to record it. As you can see, we don't have much to go on. Let's write down what preliminary causes of death we can think of. Various types of accidents are a common cause of death. The nights have been particularly, considering the conditions in which he slept. This is of no interest to us. Since the deceased clearly smelled of alcohol, I'll add alcohol poisoning to our list. We still have one thing left from the basics: rigor mortis. Well, we take our deceased by the hand, gradually re-raise it, now let it go. As you can see, the hand falls loose. What's the conclusion? Death must have occurred more than 72 hours ago. The police information appears correct. Head trauma seems the most promising, so we'll start there. For this, I need an oscillating saw. The cut is made from ear to ear. After which, we remove the skin and the top of the skull. After the basic examination, we can see that the brain's cerebral gyri in both hemispheres are symmetric. The brain looks good. Let's take a cross-section. Some pathologists prefer to examine, however, for me, holding a long, narrow blade all the time, pulling. So far, so good. The hematomas. We can rule the fatal accident out as well. Brain is in good condition, so we have no choice but to proceed to the internal examination of the other organs. I grab a scalpel from my kit. The incision should be in the shape of a letter Y. We use a deep cut to reach all the way to the ribs and to penetrate the abdominal wall. All right, now we peel back and separate the skin. Now, we need to remove the ribs. We'll need the loppers for this. Quite a satisfying crunch, for some anyway. After removing the cartilage tissue, we instantly noticed two things. Firstly, there is no congestion of the internal organs. This means that although the deceased was hypothermic, it didn't kill him. Secondly, the deceased smoked like a chimney. So, we should take a closer look at those lungs. We can see widespread black and tarry deposits caused by smoking cigarettes. Despite the tragic condition of the lungs, they are not the cause of death. Alice smoked too. It didn't kill her, but... what was I talking about? Lungs. Yes. Advanced inflammation. What now? The syringe. Now's a good time to... Specifically 3. From the eye, the heart, and the bladder. I'm interested. 5 milliliters from the left ventricle should do it. Vitreous humor analysis is very useful in indicating long-term alcohol abuse. But from the bladder, we draw about 10 milliliters of fluid. Now we take our samples to the centrifuge. But before I do that, I need to find my notebook. My dyscalculia, I mean... Please excuse me while I run and fetch it. This old thing is covered in stains. I should check this out under the microscope sometime. Let's get back to the examination. We put all of the samples into the rotor. Now, we set the appropriate time and speed. Okay, let's roll. Oh shit, the fuses again. Where were we? Oh yes, the blood alcohol concentration. Let's see what we've got here. Everything's separated as it should. Our lab is closed until tomorrow after the last, incident. However, considering that Toby's favorite eau de parfum appears to be ethanol, I'm guessing the results won't surprise me at all. Let's go further. We will now focus on the cardiovascular system, specifically the heart. We remove the organ and examine it closely. We look for dark hypoxic areas, clots, or other elements that stand out as abnormal. At first glance, the heart looks fine. The pulmonary trunk and aorta seem to be in good condition. There are no pathological changes that would have contributed to Toby's death. Now let's take a closer look at the stomach. Size is normal, healthy, pink color, and as expected, the stomach has no major external damage. We must now cut it open and inspect inside. We will do it carefully so that its contents do not spill out. We open the stomach along the greater curvature, from the heart to the pyloric end. Oh, I already feel like there's something left inside. Okay, large amount of gas, small amounts of yellow, grayish food content, resembling some kind of meat. Either our deceased hadn't eaten in days, or the bulk of his stomach had already found a way out. Looks like I'll have to find the missing contents. There are two ways here. One is obvious, and the other is... It couldn't have been suffocation, could it? I'll add this to the list and move on to the deceased's neck. At first glance, the trachea looks normal. Same result as with the stomach. The external inspection doesn't tell us anything. This time we'll cut on a tray. While cutting such a small organ as the trachea, we must make a precise incision. It's been a while since the eye wash in this thing was changed. It's probably a health hazard now. To be able to cut with the very tip of the blade, we must hold the scalpel as we would a pen. And after careful examination and deduction, we've got it. A clogged trachea. It's time to summarize the whole thing. Based on the report and preliminary documentation, it's safe to assume that the deceased passed out after consumption of alcohol and then fell asleep on his back. Then, the gastric contents refluxed and flooded the airways, causing death. That's why we don't forget about the recovery position at dorm parties. And now it's all clear. The death was suffocation. Now, signature. The mystery is solved. But for us, this is not the end. First, the dead body needs to be cleaned up. For this, we will need to close the body and grab the needle. First, we unroll the skin flaps. And then, we sew the deceased back up. I'm using the baseball stitch technique. This stitching method is very strong and quick to do. Beautiful. Now we say goodbye to the deceased and put them safely in the fridge, ready for the next stage of their journey. God, I'm tired. I'll drop these samples off at the lab on the way to the bar. I'll call Steven. I don't feel like drinking alone today.